Hi, I'm Jeff Bond, and welcome to the Steward Chair, our show about how great leaders build enduring companies that leave a lasting legacy. We believe that leadership isn't about ownership, it's about stewardship. So whether you started your own company or have been entrusted to lead it, we want to help you be a better steward of the people, the mission, and the future that you create through this show. And so the only favor we'll ever ask of you is that you follow this podcast wherever you listen. Thank you. Before we jump into today's episode, I would like to introduce you to one of my favorite leaders who's become a powerful model of stewardship in both business and life. Shane Jackson is the president of Jackson Healthcare, one of the nation's largest and most mission-driven healthcare staffing and technology companies. Under his leadership, the company has grown sixfold, serving over 20 million patients annually and generating over $2.5 billion in revenue, while earning accolades as one of the best workplaces in America. But Shane's impact extends far beyond the numbers. His leadership is grounded in the values of others first, wisdom, and growth. And so whether he's navigating a billion-dollar acquisition or coaching youth sports, Shane brings intentionality, humility, and long-term mindset to everything he touches. He also recently released this book, This is the Thing, about life, joy, and owning your purpose, which is filled with wisdom about finding joy, owning your purpose, and living a life of lasting impact. So in this episode, Shane shares personal stories and powerful insights about what it means to lead with stewardship, build trust, and live a purpose-driven life that creates ripple effects far beyond what any of us will ever see. So let's dive in. Shane, here we are again. Welcome to the Steward Chair.
Yeah, great to be here. Great to see you again, Jeff.
It's always a gift to be with you, and I'm so excited to unpack your views on leadership through the lens of stewardship. I really look at you as a model of stewardship in our friendship and the way I've gotten to know you as a leader, walking through the halls of Jackson Healthcare in Alpharetta, just an incredible campus full of happy people, joy-filled people. And so thank you for just spending this time and unpacking that wisdom with me today.
Well, thanks for the invitation and the very kind words. I appreciate that.
Yeah. So I kind of want to start. I've been thinking about leadership through the lens of stewardship quietly over the years, and it's been on my heart, but I really wanted to refocus our show, which you've been on before, Chat with Leaders, to think about this concept of stewardship and the future that we're not going to see. You know, we belong to the chair doesn't belong to us. We're keeping it warm for the next person. So we view stewardship as the long-term responsibility of a leader to care for what's been entrusted to them, whether that's people, a mission, a company, a community, all of the above, not for personal gain, but for the flourishing of others and the health of future generations. But when I say the word stewardship to you, how do you define it, and what kind of emotions does that evoke in your mind?
Well, I think that's a pretty good definition you just gave, and I'm hearing it for the first time, but some of the elements I think you hit on are very important, starting with this idea of long-term. But, to me, the idea of stewardship is start by understanding that it's this idea that you have been entrusted with things, with assets, with, all the things that you just listed. They don't belong to you, but they're entrusted to your care for a temporary period of time. I think this concept's been around a long time. The actual term steward, I think, actually really kind of came about in the Middle Ages. And you would have a king or a lord, somebody go away for a while, and they would put a steward in their place to care for their estate, right? And that's the idea where it came from. And I think the implications and the applications of stewardship are so much greater than we realize, to a point where they can become uncomfortable, right? And so you start saying, well, wait a minute, yeah, okay, maybe I can steward over some things, but I do own some things, right? Like it's mine. Well, yes, technically, but for a period of time. right? I mean, the bad news is that all of the things that you own, at some point, you will not be here, and someone else will own them, right? And so there are some very tangible examples of stewardship, but really, if you think about it, it's everything, right? And if you really think about it, over the course of your life, you've been given stewardship over a certain amount of time that you are here and able to make choices about what you're going to do. And you didn't create your life, right? I was not responsible for me being here, but I was given it, and I get to be here and make choices over a certain amount of time. And so the question is, how do I use that, and what do I want the result of all those choices to be?
All right, so that's a beautiful reflection. I love the way we're starting this. So tell the listener right now the things that stand out to you the most, the lives particularly that have been entrusted to you and what you're stewarding today, just to give them a flyover understanding of your leadership responsibility.
Yeah, so I think from a leader's perspective, and especially a business leader's perspective, I think there's probably two ways of thinking about this. So first of all, the viewpoint of like as a manager or a leader of people, right? And then the second is a steward, manager, leader of certain assets and resources, right? So I love starting with just kind of understanding the dynamic of leading people, and I think this has really changed over the years. Whereas for most of history, leadership was based on some kind of a power dynamic, right? You had the king or the chief or the general or whatever who had more power, and so people had to do what they said, otherwise it was like very dire consequences for them, right? Whatever. And so there was this power dynamic. Well, in our modern world and modern economy, that power dynamic has really shifted. I mean, there's so much demand for talented people. And I know the people that work with me and that I get to lead, these are like really smart, hardworking, sought after people. They could leave here and go work somewhere else like in no time. And so what that means is that they're choosing to follow my leadership. Well, that's a big deal. And so if you really unpack that, what they're doing is they're saying like, hey, I'm giving to you significant influence over how I spend my time, over my ability to grow, how much money I make, like all these things, this significant influence in my life. They're giving that to you. You're a steward over those things. You don't have influence on that because you have power. You have influence over it because they've given that to you, right? And that's a completely, I just think, powerful and different way of thinking about leading people. And from a broader scope, and I think especially for business owners and senior leaders, you also have stewardship over these assets and resources, and whether it's capital or just these things within the businesses that you lead that you can bring to bear. And if you're hired as a leader, like you don't own those, right? You're doing that on behalf of the shareholders or the owners or whatever, but you've been given stewardship over that. But even if you are the founder, the owner, whatever, again, these are resources that you're going to have for a limited amount of time. And I got to tell you, for me, this is so compelling in just how I think about the way I lead. That we've built this business and we have just tremendous ability to say, hey, I'm going to focus resources and capital on this. We want to go create this. We want to go solve this problem, right? Over the course of my life, that the time that I have to be able to really devote resources like that is, who knows how long it's going to last. It's going to be short. And so the question is, what do I want the result of that stewardship of those resources to be, right? Is how we focus our business. And so anyway, I think for business leaders, especially senior executives, thinking about it from both those perspectives can really change the way you view your job.
I love that question to ask yourself every day as the lens in which you make decisions in your organization, and thinking about that long term mindset, because there are so many short term pressures that are thrown at us every day. And I'm sure you've felt every single one of them over the last 10 plus years of being at the helm of this amazing organization, which, by the way, serves thousands of associates, millions of lives touched across the country, across the world. It's incredible the scope in which you're leading, and yet the humility that comes through in terms of your leadership, and also being a steward at home, as a spouse, as a father. I think you've coached over 30 youth sports teams and take great care of yourself. I'm very envious of how great a shape you're in and how you steward your time and prioritize the right things that keep you healthy. But one thing that I really enjoyed talking to you about at your book launch was the way you frame life and joy and purpose. And it really starts with thinking about the end. And I'm not trying to scare people away by talking about death here, but it's an important reality of our mortality to consider. How has that shaped your leadership when you think about a future that you're not going to personally see?
Yeah, I think having a healthy understanding, or an accurate understanding of like what happens after you die, really can help prioritize the way you want to live, right? And I think specifically what it exposes for highly driven, very successful people is that often the aim of our work, like what we're trying to accomplish, is for things that like are just not going to be right. And so, one of the things I remember years ago talking to somebody about estate planning and putting your will together and all that. And like, one of the things I can tell you is you cannot determine what happens after you die. You can't control people's behavior. You can't control what they do with whatever you just can't. So release that. Right. And so, we are often chasing things that are sometimes very noble, right? About, this legacy we want to leave after we're gone, or the things that we're trying to do. Those are valuable to think about, but they can also become like false idols where, the reality is like, we're not really going to be remembered, and and we can't control those things that happen. And by the way, we're not going to be here to experience it anyway. What we can do though is experience our life today, right? And so when you release the lie that that there are, we can like kind of control what happens after we die, and we control the people, all that, what it leaves you with is a great appreciation for the fact that we do get to experience all these amazing things in our life today. And so as I think about life purpose in my book, I've talked about this. It's really just answering the question of what's the experience of life that you want to have. Now that can sound very, very, very much like you're talking about, just like kind of, eat, drink, and be merry, and damn the consequences and all that. And it's not that at all. And in fact, I think really exploring that question does leave you with this question of what do I want my legacy to be, but not because it's something that I can control in the future. My definition of legacy is really like, what's the impact that I want to have on people, both now and in the future, because I get to experience that now. And hopefully I get to experience that as I live throughout my life. And so the long-term thinking associated with stewardship in the personal life is vital, but it's not because it leads to things that I can control, because I can't. It's because it leads me to richer experiences in my life today.
Yes. Is there any seasons of your life where you feel like that wasn't so clear to you? And maybe how did you awaken to that reality that it was so enriching to your life?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I think, life is a journey of understanding meaning and what's rich and what's not. And, I actually talk about this in one of my books, but if you think about like when you're in your 20s and you're really kind of first getting into your career, like how exciting everything is. Like I remember when I got to go on my first like real business trip, which ironically, so I have lived almost my entire life in Atlanta, but when I first graduated college, my first real professional job was in Dallas, but I got to go to a conference, like a convention in Atlanta. And it's so cool. Like, you get to stay in a hotel and like eat at nice restaurants and fly in a plane and, kind of all that sort of thing. When you get into your 30s, certainly by your 40s and whatever, like I hate business travel. Like, I mean, I will do anything I can to not, have to travel. Right. And so but early on, like all these like experiences, and I get to do this and I get to do that. And there's some, kind of naive, joyous kind of wonder in some of that. But what you have to learn over time is that those trappings are temporal, and that the excitement around them actually fades pretty quickly. And so, kind of going through life and going like, okay, these things that I was chasing, the achievement, the purchase, like all of that, like, man, I really wasted a lot of time and energy chasing that stuff because it felt good for a minute. And then I was like, now what? Right. And so, just learning, okay, I really need to put the focus of my efforts on things like legacy and building the relationship and the impact that I have on others, because it's just it's more lasting and a richer experience of life.
I want to talk in a minute about what I hear all the time about you, Shane, is that people are in awe about how much of a strategic driver this thinking is within your business, a multi-billion-dollar healthcare workforce solutions, just a beautiful business. For anybody that doesn't know about it, go to jacksonhealthcare.com and just check out the depth in which they're serving. But, in your book, this is the thing. I was thrilled to interview you at your book launch, but you signed it for me. Of course, I was going to get it signed while I was there, but you said, "Thanks for choosing to impact others. You're creating ripples that will go well beyond what you will see. Thank you for owning your purpose." So this is something that in the moment you chose to say to me, and I'm assuming you choose to say to others, to encourage them to think about stewardship and legacy themselves. How important is it for you to pass down that kind of encouragement to your associates, to other leaders in your organization, that way of thinking, so that they can too experience the fullness of life and joy that was intended for them?
Yeah, well, thanks for that. It's just very rewarding for me personally, right? This idea of ripples, right? It's just it's the rock in the pond, and the ripples go out, and the rock never sees where all the ripples go. And thinking about what you want the impact of those ripples to be can be rewarding. But I would also make the strongest argument I can that I think this type of thinking is very, very powerful for businesses. So, we started and you were giving your definition of stewardship, and like one of the first phrases you used was long term, right? It's thinking beyond this moment, and thinking about the impact over time, over everyone that's impacted, like all the stakeholders, right? Which is really kind of one way of thinking about wisdom. So it turns out that when you're really thinking about the impact on other people over time, it leads to some really great businesses, right? I mean, like if you are really thinking about for your customer, like, hey, what's actually in their best interest? What's going to have the impact on them? And not just like, how do I make the most money out of this transaction? But like, how do I actually build something that's beneficial to them over time? It builds to, it leads to like really great products and really great relationships with your customers and trust. And so one of the things that we've done inside the business a few years ago, I rolled out what we call our definition of success. And so like in our business, with our leaders, they're expected obviously to think about strategy and, what's their strategy in the market. Our definition of strategy, everyone has a different definition. Ours is simply the answer to the question of how do you win, right? And so like if you think about sports, like strategies like in baseball, like, hey, we win with pitching and defense. Okay, great. That's how we're going to win. Or in football, we win by running the ball or whatever, right? And so the challenge is, unlike in baseball, where it's pretty clear if you won or not, if you have more runs than the other team, you won. In business, success, winning feels different to everyone. And so I realized we really needed to create a baseline understanding in our business of what it means to win. What is success? At the end of the year, when I'm looking at a company or I'm looking at a leader and saying, did you win this year? Were you successful this year? What's the basis on which I would say that? And so it's multifaceted, but we really kind of boiled it down to two phrases. Success at Jackson Healthcare is sustainable growth and meaningful impact. Sustainable growth and meaningful impact. In other words, at the end of the year, I'm going to look and say, as a leader, did you do things in your business this year that's going to lead to sustainable growth over time, right? Versus just making decisions that maybe were good short term, but are going to hurt us long term. And then, did you have a meaningful impact? Did you have a meaningful impact on your customers? Did you have a meaningful impact on your associates and your stakeholder? Which, by the way, if you are really meaningfully impacting people, it does tend to help you get sustainable growth over time. And so we have become very, very clear about that with our organization. And it's going back to, again, this long-term thinking. That was the main thing that I was trying to to communicate with our company and with our leaders, is that for us, success necessarily implies long-term thinking. And that as we're thinking about what we do today, it's under the viewpoint of how does this impact us long-term? Because, by the way, typically if you do the thing that's better for you long-term, it's generally going to be the right decision for short-term, right? And we still have annual budgets and short-term goals and all that sort of thing. Those are necessary disciplines on a company, but they're constructed with the view of how does this help us have meaningful impact on our key stakeholders over time.
I love how you take the complex and you make it simple. For instance, you have 3 core values: other first, wisdom, and growth.
Yeah.
Very simple phrases and words, but there's so much complexity in that. Same thing with how you talk to leaders. How do we win? Talking about the long-term sustainable growth and impact, but there's metrics, there's KPIs, there's ways that you look back and measure that in your P&L and your EBITDA and your revenue, your growth, and sometimes, growth is flat. You have up and down years, you have up and down, fiscal periods. How do you and your leaders, look at the ebbs and flows of life, of business, and stay focused on that simplicity? Like how are you able to kind of break down the complex and make it simple like that while, giving people clear long-term thinking and vision?
Well, I think simplicity leads to clarity. I have to break things down to kind of the core elements and maybe just because I don't have a good enough memory, but like if there's more than 3 things on a list, I can't really remember it. Like if my wife sends me to the grocery store, if it's like, if she needs 3 things, I'm okay. Once it goes to 4 and 5, I have to start writing it down on my phone. Right. And so I think one of the mistakes that we make as leaders is that we just have to have too many things going on. Right. I tell this story in one of my books. I was working with, he was a friend and kind of helping him, consulting with his business a little bit. And, it came in and like, tell me what your plan is. And they had like 10 core objectives for the year. And like, nobody could even remember them. I'm like, well, how are you going to, if these are the 10 essential things you have to do to get done, if you can't remember them, like, how are you going to do it? And I don't think we can do that. I think you can handle like 2 or 3 things and, and that's it. And so we work really, really hard to make sure that we have clarity on what those core essential things are going to be. And then when you understand what the core values are, definitions, that whatever those core things are, then you can apply them to all the different things that show up in a business, right? And so I think it really helps people understand how to act when you have clarity on what the core is.
I think that's such sage advice. I've been part of organizations that are amazing purpose-led organizations, but you have a purpose, mission, vision, values, and then you have 14 guiding principles, and you come in and, you have to have a class on this for weeks so that you can memorize that and report that to your next level manager. Only to forget about it down the line.
Yeah.
And I'm like you, if I go to the store and Katie tells me, pick up this, and this, I'm like, you need to put it on their shared list.
Yeah,
We use Google Keep, best list ever. But I love that. Tell me a little bit of something about, I really, as you know, love values-based leadership and thinking about how that produces business outcomes and how that involves strategy as a conscious capitalist. For-profit business can really yield great outcomes for future generations and today, like you said. How has your thinking evolved over time? Like you said, you kind of started in your 20s, you had this one view, but maybe have there been any things that have surprised you about leaning further into your values and your faith and just everything that is who you are as a human being and allowing that to flow into what you're now seeing as a tremendously successful organization?
Yeah, I think I think maybe what's been a little bit surprising and shouldn't have been is how the market has rewarded this. Like, I think we in me view, like, when you're making decisions out of integrity and out of alignment with values, right? It necessarily implies saying no to things, and I think the assumption can be is that that's going to be limiting, right? You're going to say no to a deal, you're not going to make the money, you're going to, and that's, and it is for sure. But for us, this thinking about others first, thinking about the long term, thinking about the fact that we've been getting stewardship and over assets and we're responsible for them, it has created an environment where we've really built trust with our customers, and that has been rewarded over the long term to a way greater degree than I could have possibly imagined. I remember a few years ago, we had a kind of big financial milestone, and I called my dad, who was our founder, and I was like, "Hey, you're about to see the financials." And I was like, "I just probably should admit this to you, but like, Dad, I had no idea that we could build a business like this big. Like, I just, I probably shouldn't admit that lack of vision, but I can't believe it." And he was like, he started laughing. He's like, "Are you kidding me? We passed what I dreamed of years ago." I was like, "Oh, okay." I tell you, I think one of the best examples of this, where I really learned this, I thought it, hopefully will be true, but it was during the Great Recession in 2008 and 2009. That was anyone who was leading during that time. I mean, I think for us, in a lot of ways, rivaled COVID and just how hard it was to lead. There was so much uncertainty, banks going underwater every day. I mean, it was crazy. And for us, like a lot of people, we really saw a downturn in the market. and I remember pulling my leadership team together, and I said, "Look, here's the deal." I said, this is going to be hard. I said, "But we're going to survive it in ways that other people aren't. And then when the market comes back, we're going to grow faster than anyone else." They're like, "Okay, why?" I said, "Because here's the deal. When your customer has leverage, right? They have the power. They get to choose who they work with, right? Because it's a down market, and there's a lot of people trying to sell them. Like, they get a lot of choice over who they work with. They're gonna choose to work with someone they trust. And the way we have done business over all these years has built trust. And then when the market comes back and volume increases, we're going to be one of the few ones that's still in relationship with our customers, and we're going to experience that before anyone else. And I'll tell you, not to brag, but it is exactly what happened. And 2010 and through 2012 still is some of the fastest growth we've ever had in our company. And I think it was exactly because of that. And it just showed that, when you act in a way that's good for people and over the long term, it builds trust. Trust is the real currency of business. People do business with those they trust. If they don't trust you, they will, as quickly as possible, run away from you. And I think that's it's a recipe for success.
Talk about the ripple effects. The cost of mistrust has tremendous ripple effects in terms of the word that gets out there with your stakeholder communities and the industries in which you serve. And I think that's great advice for anyone that's experiencing the uncertain macroeconomic times that we're in today, that are scratching their heads as to what tomorrow is going to look like. Certainty is never guaranteed, but that level of leadership and poise in those times in a way that we can build confidence and focusing on the things that make our business tick, our core values, and that trust being the greatest currency, like you said, is something that every leader should take to heart, I feel, in this moment of what you're saying. On top of that, are there other things maybe that you've learned, other maybe countercultural beliefs around your leadership that business leaders should take to heart to maybe start, or even more importantly, stop doing to kind of unlock things that are getting them stuck and maybe help with momentum?
Yeah, one of the things I've been thinking about a lot lately is encouraging leaders on what I call radical vulnerability, and radical transparency. So what got me thinking about this is probably a couple of years ago now, I had a really good friend, one of my closest friends, very successful guy, tech entrepreneur guy, and such different startups. He's just super smart. And he emailed me, kind of stuff going on with his business and whatever. It just kind of copied me on some email he sent some other people, and it was like not a good update. And I was like, "Ooh, man, he's probably not feeling great right now." And so I just, I kind of reached out to him, like, "How you doing?" And he's like, "It's a little tough. Like, this is harder than I thought, and sales aren't where we thought they would be by now, and kind of all that." And he he sent me a note. I'll never forget. He said, "It's getting really hard to be the optimist." Because as a leader, when things aren't going bad, like we want to, hey, we can do this, and we're going to get. He's like, it's getting really hard to be the optimist. And I sent him a note back, and I said, look, I want to challenge that, because I don't think what your team needs right now is an optimist. What they need is a realist with a plan. And I think, we as leaders, we feel like being vulnerable about challenges, about concerns, about failures, about like all that sort of thing would lead to people having less confidence in us and our ability to lead, when I think the opposite can actually be true. When you're the kind of Pollyanna eternal optimist, and things aren't going, well, people start going like, man, does this guy understand reality? Right? Like, are they seeing what I'm seeing, and all that sort of thing. And it can lead to a lack of confidence compared to, hey, like, let me tell you, like, yeah, I see like these things are hard and this is not going well. And I'm a little bit concerned about this because I'm seeing this as well. First of all, is validating to people, because they go, oh, well, that's how I feel. And if he feels that way, then I must actually be smart, know what's going on, and, and all that sort of thing. But then saying, yeah, these things are hard and I'm concerned about this, but let me tell you what we're going to do. These are the principles that have always guided our company. We're going to apply these here. And I think that if we do that, we will be able to go figure this out. That is such a confidence inspiring message. right? And I just think as leaders, when we are willing to share our vulnerabilities and yet demonstrate that we're still moving on and that we still have a plan and how we're doing, like, that inspires people to want to follow you like nothing else, and certainly unlike false bravado or false confidence could bestow. And so, like, that's, I don't know, that's just something I've been thinking a lot about lately, in trying to encourage leaders, is like, look for areas where you can be transparent and where you can be vulnerable, that maybe before you didn't really think you could be transparent on those issues. Because, like, I mean, as leader, like, there's a lot of confidential stuff we feel like we can't share, but I think it's a much smaller percentage than we generally think about. I think there's a lot more stuff we could be sharing that than we do, and by doing so, it could actually build confidence in the people that are following us.
That is incredibly freeing, and also probably the best reflection on vulnerability that I've ever heard in a business context. So I think that's a talking point to lean into in your and on the stages that you find yourself on. I know we're at time, and so I just want to kind of quickly land the plane here. We've talked about a lot today, and it has meant a lot to me. I'm sure it has to our listeners too. But what is kind of that one thing that we didn't say or ask or go to, or that, like, one thing that you hope listeners walk away with today as a business owner thinking about stewardship?
In preparation for this meeting, I was just kind of thinking through some of this, and I thought about something that happened to me a few years ago. This was maybe 2021, something like that. It was kind of after COVID, and everybody was trying to kind of do stuff to, make people want to be back together, right? And out of our virtual remote settings, and all that sort of thing. Anyway, and so we did this event, and we actually do a lot of this kind of stuff on our campus, but this one we had, it was like a big barbecue, and we had music going, all this stuff. And anyway, I just remember that we had a big tent set up with, like, kind of all these tables, and where people were eating lunch and stuff. And so I went down and, kind of got my food, and then I walked out into the tent, like, just looking for somewhere to sit down and eat. And anyway, I remember walking out there and walking around and having this moment of panic. And it's probably like, a lot of us experienced, like, in middle school, when you walk into the cafeteria and you don't know anybody, and you're like, oh my God, who do I sit with? And it was that, like, I'm looking around, I'm like, I don't know anybody. And what's worse is that, like, say, they all obviously knew me, and, like, nobody wants to sit next to the boss. And so, like, I'm walking around looking, and everybody's doing this, like, oh my God, please don't sit next to me. And and it was super awkward. And I think I ended up kind of, I think I sat down for a minute by myself, ate real quickly, and ran back up to my office. And so I remember getting back to my office, and it was a moment of kind of shame, because I remember thinking, it's really not good. I mean, there was probably, I don't know, 150 people sitting under this tent. It's really not good that I didn't know any of them. I mean, like, and thinking, God, I got to get out of my office. I got to walk around more. I got to be more accessible, like all that, which, by the way, that was true. But then I remember sitting there, and that feeling of shame switched with a feeling of gratitude, because the realization that hit me was, man, this thing is not about me. There are all these people who are doing all the stuff that makes this company great, and I don't even know who they are. Like, I mean, it was like, I am so small in this grand thing, that it was like, okay, wow, this isn't about me. And that's what I would think, back to your question of what do you want to leave people with, wherever you are in life. And especially, probably got to know this, if you're leading a big team or big organization, it's not about you.
It's incredible, Shane. Well, everyone pick up the latest book. This is the thing about life, joy, owning your purpose. Shane, it's such a gift to know you. Love you, brothers. Good time.
Yeah.
spending with everybody here, and I know they got a lot out of it. So awesome. Thank you for being on the Steward Chair.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate you, man.
Thank you so much for listening to the Steward Chair. If today's conversation inspired you, we'd be grateful if you'd follow the show wherever you get your podcasts. This show is brought to you by Chat with Leaders Media and End of the Line Productions, a collaboration committed to helping leaders steward their influence with purpose and impact. Our production team is Quentin Thomas, executive producer, Thomas Mastrototoro, associate producer, Daniel Mastrototoro, managing editor, and me, Jeff Bond, your creative director, host, and research lead. Until next time, go be a leader worth following.